YouTube family, what is up? We have a super juicy video today all about how the whole principle of divine timing can be used as a spiritual bypass. So in this video, I'm going to speak about what divine timing is, if you haven't heard of that before. I'm going to also speak about what actually spiritual bypassing is, and a few key examples of the different kinds of spiritual bypassing. And then we're going to speak about how to essentially have more awareness and help you to see maybe you have tendencies where you're actually bypassing and you don't realize that that's what you're doing because you're grounding yourself in particular truths which are valid, for example, divine timing, but it's not whole and embodied, and so it's bypassing, so you're not progressing, right? And we're going to touch on the difference between avoidance and boundaries. We're going to touch on a bunch of different things. So you'll see in the timestamps below what the sections of this video are. So just go check them out. Let's hop straight into it, shall we? So, divine timing. What is divine timing? Divine timing is a very valid and real principle, which is essentially some kind of universal truth that everything happens at the right time, right? And so a phrase that might be accompanied with divine timing is like, it will, everything happens in its right time. If it's meant to be, it will be. Things like that. And divine timing speaks to how not everything is in our control. There are greater forces, elder powers, behind the scenes, so to speak, which are holding this entire thing that we call existence. And there's even a really epic book, which if you're interested in this, I highly recommend you go read it. It's called Your Soul's Plan by Robert Schwartz. And in this book, he encourages readers to just open their perspectives for a moment and consider a possibility that before we incarnate into the earthly plane, our soul actually, kind of like imagine it like we have a meeting with other souls, perhaps in our soul group or other soul groups. And we talk about the specific lessons that we need to learn this life based on other lessons in other lives and a whole bunch of stuff. And particular members in our soul group will be like, yes, I will be that person for you. I will be the person who might even have a very strong, uncomfortable presence in your life just to help you learn this lesson. So it's nuanced, it's not all love and light kind of thing, but super real. Divine timing is kind of something which maybe we haven't had the language of what it truly means, because of what I'm trying to say is in divine timing, the key point is that there's a divine aspect, right? And so that's what I touched on before. The divine aspect is the divine which is reality, creation. The divine which is on a more zoomed in level, our soul's plan, right? Our divine blueprint, our destiny. These things which are more metaphysical and less tangible in some sense, but the driving force, which is the one that guides us in certain directions. Like, why are your interests your interests? Why are my interests my interests? Why did you incarnate into that family at that time, right? And so to give an example to illustrate this, let's say you're someone who was born in a war-torn city, okay? Both your nature and your nurture would be extremely different than someone who grew up in a comfortable house in a comfortable suburb. They had food on the table every night, a roof over their head, a relatively functional family. They went to school, they did the thing, they went to uni, they had a group of friends, right? Different. Neither better nor worse, but then applying divine timing, the divine aspect says on some level, you chose to be incarnating into that family at that time because there were different lessons that your soul wanted to learn this life. for which those other circumstances wouldn't assist you in that way. So divine timing and, well, the divine aspect isn't just saying, oh, it's divine, therefore it's like blissful and beautiful and amazing. No, it's divine because it's so hyper specific and interdependent and like so orchestrated in a way that just seems like, how in God's name could that even be possible? Like, I know with times when I'm like facilitating constellations or being in constellations, it's crazy how it's those people who arrive that day to participate in this constellation, and the person who's the issue holder has that specific issue, but somehow the people who arrive to that workshop have very similar themes that emerge in their life, which is so touched on based on the representation that they step into in the constellation. And it's just like, whoa, like that feels divine. This divine orchestration, right? So divine timing is, yeah, something that can also manifest in our system as like that gut feeling, intuition. Divine timing can come through as a challenging obstacle, something that seems like a coincidence, but also just synchronicity, right? Something auspicious happens, like a person just appears in your life out of seeming nowhere, and you're like, how did you, what? And they end up being a really key figure in your life for maybe even a certain period of time. Or a book just appears, which is the exact book that you were wanting to, I don't know, maybe it was a specific book you were looking for, or you sort of been thinking about how you really need to start learning about this certain thing, and then in hard rubbish a book appears, right? So divine timing works in many ways. So it's valid, okay? This video is not trampling on this as truth, because from my worldview at least, this is real. The issue is when divine timing gets used as a mechanism of avoidance, defense, and honestly, anything that's like deferring power, deferring responsibility, deferring communication or growth. So we're going to touch on that a lot more later on. So, I mean, obviously divine timing has its benefits. It can really allow us to stop trying to like grab onto everything and hyper control everything, because we realize and know that there are so many things outside of our control, like we don't know enough to worry kind of thing. And that helps us face the unknown. That helps us like let go a little bit, and not in a sort of apathetic way, but in a surrender kind of way. And if you're someone who experiences a lot of like control issues or perfectionism, being able to accept divine timing as a reality can assist in letting that go. And that's useful, right? Not when it's a bypass. So what is a spiritual bypass? So this term was originally coined by a man called John Wellwood. And when asked about this in an interview, he said, quote, "Spiritual bypassing is a term I coined to describe a process I saw happening in the Buddhist community I was in, and also in myself. Although most of us were sincerely trying to work on ourselves, I noticed a widespread tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks." End quote. You feel that? You feel how it's like in the name of self-growth, in the name of embracing these spiritual universal principles, it gets used to avoid very real things that are alive in our system, like unresolved emotional wounding, attachment style wounding, all the things. And so the spiritual bypassing is essentially avoiding facing the very real pain and consequences of loss of a loved one, a relationship breaking up, family issues, childhood abuse, loneliness, low self-esteem, self-sabotaging behaviors, fear of the unknown, fear in general. mental or emotional health issues, physical health issues, right? Like not actually addressing the things that are manifesting in our physical body because of insert whatever kind of spiritual principle or ideology. Avoiding facing the healing of various psychological realities of attachment wounding, attachment styles, the avoidance of facing environmental issues and making a change in your life, essentially just the avoidance of any other problem. So again, these spiritual principles are valid, and there are countless lists of what these spiritual principles are, like non-duality, like detachment, like divine timing, right? And it's just, again, like when they start getting used as a crutch, when they start getting used as a defense mechanism, as a mechanism of avoidance, rather than accountability, that's when it's a bypass. And this might feel maybe good in the moment, but it actually is a jail cell of illusions, okay? So I want to give you, I have 16. I have 16 forms of bypassing, which we could hold in the umbrella of spiritual bypasses here. These are really useful to know of, and I'm sure there are more, but let's give you 16 to start. So the first one, the optimistic bypass. This one is so good. It's a bypass because it's a hyper focus on the positive. It's like trying to cut off the limb of the so-called negative. It's like a phobia against heavier emotional states, like a complete avoidance of confrontation, right? Because it's not positive, right? And so this is like good vibes only, just focus on the positive, right? And these things are valid, right? Yeah, fuck yeah, focus on the positive. Fuck yeah, good vibes only. But what are you not facing? Good vibes only, I'm not going to face how I'm in a super toxic situation at my work, but good vibes only. You see? Then it becomes a bypass. There's the aggrandizement bypass, which is essentially a seeking to feel superior, better than, more spiritual than, more whatever than, more enlightened, whatever, without an actual solid foundation, okay? So, I don't know, you could get people who are like, oh, I did this 1 hour workshop and now I'm a Reiki master. Or it's like, oh, I experienced a rush of adrenaline and now I'm Kundalini awakened, to cover up the fact that I feel really low self-worth and I'm looking for some hat or identity to put on so I don't have to face my own self-worth issues, whatever it might be, okay? And I'm not at all undermining the people who have gone through the years and hours of initiation and work to be able to be a Reiki master or someone who is working with Kundalini. Go you, okay? So moving on, the victim bypass. This is real. This is so real. I know for myself, this has been a big one. The victim bypass is essentially any excuse that feeds some sort of self-pity party or the victim blame trap. And as someone, let's say you're super sensitive, okay, that's a very real thing. You're very sensitive energetically, you're very empathic, you can walk into a room and you're like, whoa, I'm just feeling all the things. Cool, that's real, okay? That becomes a bypass when it's an excuse not to take self-responsibility for learning psychic boundaries, emotional boundaries, mental boundaries, boundaries full stop. It becomes a bypass when you feel like you can't go out there and do what you need to do in the world because, oh, I'm just too sensitive. It's like not embracing the fact that these are very real things for you and you can learn how to work with them instead of letting them instead of being a slave to them, right? Or a slave to anything. So yeah, that's the victim bypass. The key being this sort of victim blame trap, Number 4, the psychonaut bypass. I like this. So, I'm someone who absolutely reveres the power and the medicinal, expansive evolutionary power of psychedelics. Where psychedelics can become a bypass is when they are used mostly as a means of escapism rather than evolution, rather than a means to do the soul work, right? So that's pretty self-explanatory. There might be something to say, I actually don't know if I fully believe this, where people are like, oh, if you had an enlightening experience using psychedelics, it's not real. I'm like, it's real, right? We just got there in a different way. Instead of meditating in the caves for 10 years, we got to touch that through high dose psilocybin or something, right? And it's still real. It's still a valid experience, but maybe the integration of that will be harder than someone who's worked years and years to build that foundation so they can naturally access it and hold it, kind of thing. So when I say the psychonaut bypass, I'm not exactly speaking about that, but there is something to say about using psychedelics as that form of escapism and without any awareness of the need to integrate those experiences, okay? So something there. The horoscope bypass, super real. Like, I love astrology, okay? Love it. I think it's a fantastic system. Like with anything, I'm cautious not to place all of my eggs in one basket, so to speak. But the horoscope bypass is sort of like, I mean, you could probably apply this to any system, like the human design bypass, the whatever bypass. But it's almost like when it's a hyperfixation on what this system is telling you and kind of giving your power away to it and treating it as gospel. Like going to a psychic reading and just fully believing what the psychic reading is telling you without agency. So with the horoscope bypass, toxic astrology, right? I mean, what's an example of toxic astrology? It's like, I guess an example of toxic astrology is like when you, I don't know, do like a relationship thing of like, oh, I'm a Taurus and so I'm compatible with a Sagittarius. I don't know if that's actually a thing, by the way. I'm just sort of pulling this out of my ass. But then you meet someone and you're like, oh, you're a Gemini, so no can do, no can continue this relationship. That's toxic astrology because you literally just put someone who is their own universe that is so nuanced and complex, just like you, and you put them in a box, which was the Gemini box, right? And that's just their sun sign. If you actually apply astrology, they've got a bunch of other things. They've got Mercury and Saturn and the moon and Lilith and Chiron and okay. So I'm not an astrologer, so I'm not going to pretend that I can give you the most intelligent, articulate answer on this, but you get what I'm saying, right? Okay, moving on. Number 6 is the saint bypass. So that is essentially extreme black and white thinking and an exiling of anything that is not considered saintly, aka shadow, aka carnal desires, right? Desires full stop. It's like, nope, that's not saintly, that's not pure, exile. You feel that? There's the spirit guide bypass. And, you know, you might know, like I'm working within shamanic realms, having done years of initiation, and guides are the key of the work in many ways. Again, it's a nuanced thing. They're definitely a part of it though. And so bless them. The reason why it can become a bypass is if there's it's probably due to a lack of education of how there's an expectation that the guides will just like take full responsibility for your life. They'll babysit, They'll just give you all the answers, all the things, instead of guiding, teaching, providing insight if asked. Within the definition of benevolent and malevolent, right? Benevolent beings will respond if permission is granted or if they are asked. So if, there's oh my God, okay, no, I'm not going to open that can of worms right now, but just know that when we're talking about guides, if they give information when asked, right? Cool. Sometimes they might give a nudge if not asked, also cool. But just make sure that there's a heart feeling there. Okay, moving on. The prayer, affirmation, mantra bias. So this is when prayer, when affirmations, when various mantras, which are all beautiful and all valid, like the practice of prayer, the practice of affirmations, the practice of mantras, beautiful, okay? If that is something you're already doing, fantastic. If there's something you're interested in doing, look into it. Know that may become a bypass if the prayer, if the mantra, if the affirmation starts to be a form of avoidance of taking self-responsibility, of taking action, and it bypasses trusting our instincts. Okay. So be aware of that. There's the guru teacher bypass. So this is when we place our trust in someone, a teacher figure, a guide, a mentor, whoever, and without maybe vetting or without putting what is said into practice, it's often becoming a bypass when what they're sharing is just adopted as ideology, okay, without actually trying it for yourself. It's sort of like blind faith. It's like, oh, they said it, therefore it is gospel, it is truth. I'm just going to take it on as a belief. Rather than, okay, I heard this, I'm going to put that into practice, see if that actually works for me. Okay, it works for me, great. No, this doesn't work for me. Okay, maybe it's still valid, but it doesn't work for me, but I've actually put in the effort to try it out. You see how there's a difference there? So that applies, you don't have to have a guru for that. That applies to anyone who's teaching you anything. That includes me, okay? I'm sharing with you what is so present in my life, what have been themes that have been really present in these last years and things that I'm passionate about, right? So I might say things in a super clarified or passionate way, but that doesn't mean you have to take it on as ideology. That doesn't mean that you just have to believe me, blind faith, right? These are invitations for you to consider for yourself, okay? And that's how you stay empowered. So yeah, anyone on YouTube, any teacher, any mentor, whoever, your friends, okay? This is so that you don't place people on pedestals, because as soon as you do that, it's like, this doesn't mean that you don't respect people. It doesn't mean that you treat your elders as like, oh, hey mate, have a beer kind of thing. It's like there's still respect there, and there's still an acknowledgement of one who has maybe more experience in that field, right? But it's not like putting them on a pedestal, which at the expense of your own agency, at the expense of you recognizing your own innate worth, right? So pay attention to that. There's the finger pointing bypass. So this is number 10. This is really big. This is, in what video did we touch on that? I don't remember right now. But this is essentially where it's like pointing outside is like all the things wrong, like they're all outside. Like all the blame, all the evil is outside. It's their fault, right? Like not taking any self-responsibility and just seeing the problems outside of yourself rather than recognizing, like, if you can see evil outside, then you've got to recognize that there are seeds of potential of evil that exists within you. why I say seeds of potential is like there's a potential for you to access that degree of so-called evil. You may not actualize it. It might be dormant, but you must recognize that as within, so without. If you can see it outside, it exists within. And you're like, what do you mean, Sophie? I'm not going around bumming everyone and drinking blood. Okay, all good, right? I'm not saying that you are, okay? But just recognize that as is the nature of duality, as within, so without. If it exists outside, the potential for you to access evil, for you to play out evil, is also there. And again, you may not act on it. You may not ever act on it. But so that you don't finger point bypass, you must at least find some acceptance that that is the case. And if you really don't believe me, all good. Experiment with it, okay? Do more research on it. But just, I invite you to consider that. Okay, the ego bypass. This is number 11. This is this whole thing of like, oh, you got to get rid of the ego, man. And there's truth to that because one must, well, we are encouraged to gaze within and identify the false self, right? And the false self is bolstered up a lot of the time by our ego, which finds safety with the false self. And so when we're actually saying you got to get rid of the ego, it's like, well, you don't have to, but if you want to, may you peel back the false layers of self so that you grow a healthy ego who can assist you and support your path in this life. Because if you say destroy the ego without actually knowing what that means, this is anti-life, this is anti-diversity, anti-plurality, which is kind of boring, right? Like, we don't all just want to wear white shirts. Like, okay, so just be aware of that. What I'm not saying is that you've got to have a super rigid, crystallized, bolstered up ego, which is unkind and very self-serving at the expense of others and, you know, all that kind of jazz, okay? But I'm not saying that you shouldn't have an ego. Like, what does that even mean? For me to be me and you to be you, there is an ego identity structure, okay? Based on nurture, but based on nature, based on the various threads of our soul and how they weave with those other factors to create the tapestry of who we are. And our ego is the ally who helps us carry out our stuff in this life, okay? So yeah, won't go too much more into that. Intellectual bypass. This is a good one. This is so real. It's essentially where you can intellectually grasp a concept, be it non-duality, be it as within, so without, be it any of the sort of spiritual or reality principles. So you might get it, right? Your head, it understands what it means in some sense, but it's not embodied, okay? It's not embodied wisdom. And so the intellectual bypass is pointing out that there's a difference between knowledge, not knowing, and knowing, right? So you might have the knowledge about it and you might be able to kind of get it, but the knowing is like, oh, I've had like a direct felt experience, like I've become directly conscious of this. And so it's not just theory, like I've lived this. It's not just something I heard and kind of read about. I've felt this. I've moved through this in one layer. So yeah, there's that. Number 13 is the emotional bypass. And this is all about how it's a bypass of feeling the feels. okay, in the name of good vibes only, in the name of, oh, it's just not meant to be, okay? And so this is more focused in on the whole notion of detachment, which is so valid, okay? But detachment is not about detachment from feelings, but from emotional reactivity. So you got to feel it to heal it, as they say, without getting stuck or looping in the process, right? Move it through. In, various meditation practices, I know for sure with Vipassana, the detachment is the capacity to be in an equanimous state, like not attached to, or rather than not attached, like not trying to bring a label to things which move through the system. Like, oh, I've been meditating for 2 hours and my knees are like burning, okay? And the Vipassana is like, hey, how about you just go hang out in that area and just observe, just feel it. Don't label this as pain, this is horrible, this is so bad, oh my God, or like, wow, so blissful, this is amazing, I never want this to end. But just notice the thing. And maybe you'll keep noticing it, and maybe it'll just disappear. And then you keep scanning, right? So there's something about that which is incredible, okay? It's just the matter of detaching from the attachment. Detaching from the attachment. Exactly. Detaching from the emotional reactivity, okay? You get what I mean? The group bypass. Oh, hold on, I just need to stretch my back for a second. It's really cold in this room. Okay. The group bypass. Politics, religion, sport, cults, anything which fosters a hive mind, group think, anything essentially which is saying that the individual kind of doesn't matter. Not that the individual is more important than, but, keep your head down, just agree with what the group says, okay? That's a group bypass. It's almost like you're bypassing an individual intuitive knowing, you're bypassing your unique difference so that you can belong. And we all have a core need to belong, to tribe, right? And so that's valid. Though if that is, this need, this truth is used to avoid speaking up, to avoid choosing a different path, to avoid anything which counters the hive, then you're not honoring your truth. And this is a group bypass, okay? Number 15 is the literal bypass, and this is taking things literally, which are actually supposed to be understood as symbol. So that could include religious, I want to say doctrine, but the Bible, the Quran, right? Taking everything literally when its original intent was not for it to be taken literally, but for the meta themes and symbols to be moved through the system and felt to gain a meta meaning. Myth is another perfect example. Instead of taking the myth so literally, it's like, what is the meta lesson that is being shared here through the symbols of these characters in that time, in who they encounter, in the dialogue that's shared, in the way that the story unfolds, right? What is being said here, okay? And finally, with this list that I have here for you guys, we have the body sexual bypass. So body/sexual bypass. These could be two, but I just popped them into one. It's essentially, it has different faces. So focusing more on the body bypass, it's almost like it could also be, okay, all the thoughts at once. It could be a hyperfixation on the body, which can take you away from your soul growth it can be a hyperfixation, therefore, on materialism, okay, without recognizing that everything has spiritual roots. So this hyperfixation on materialism or the physical could mean that you just look at the symptom instead of pulling out the root. For example, I've had back pain for years, okay? And the focus on the physical exclusively is you not looking at the metaphysical roots. You're not looking at how you felt. Actually, I don't know the metaphysical meaning of back, but let me just like riff on that for a second. It could be you've never felt supported in your life, okay? You felt really weighed down by various burdens. You've carried too much. You've carried and taken on responsibility that isn't yours again and again and again and again. And eventually your back has just cocked it, okay? You felt pain, you felt weighed down. And so the hyperfixation on the physical is like you just look at the physical symptoms, okay? It's also a bypass if you don't look at the physical symptoms, okay? And when you don't face that, yes, you also do need to address this. But it's also a bypass if you don't look at the root, okay? So I hope that makes sense. The body bypass is also a like pedestalling of these sort of more disembodiment practices, even using meditation as an escape, because that's you're less in this body, right? So you're actually bypassing the body's needs, okay? You're bypassing the need to be grounded, okay? If you aren't grounded, where are you? You're floating. And while you're floating, what's running the vehicle? If you're floating, how can your soul fill this vessel? The true meaning of embodiment is soul in body, okay? So be aware of that as well. And the sexual aspect of it is a denial of sexual needs, a shaming of sexuality. And various religions would totally shame sexuality and labeling it as a spiritual hindrance. But even in Kabbalistic texts, they're like, this is important, okay? It's a holistic framework. You can't access true spirituality if you deny sexuality. Actually, in other practices, more like tantric practices, these energies weave together so that there can be astral journeying, so that there can be enlightenment experiences. Like it's a whole thing. So just be aware of that. Yeah, I find bypasses so interesting, especially when I started learning about them some years ago. So if you found this useful, and maybe if you even want perhaps a video series devoted to these various kinds of bypasses, let me know below with a comment of some sort, but specific enough so I know you're talking about this. Okay, so now about divine timing more specifically. So within each of these different forms of bypasses that I just shared with you, divine timing could come in to each of them in a various way, right? And divine timing, which I defined for you before, it gets used as a bypass when it's an excuse for not taking action. That's the key. How waiting for the right time can actually become a crutch even to avoid hard conversations, to avoid hard emotions, to avoid decision making, to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about your situation and how you got to get out of there, or how you're not facing your health, right, in its various forms, okay? So it's not the right time, or all in good time, or if it's meant to be, it will be, right? Various things which are true and hold truth. When it's a self-sabotage mechanism, okay? And that's a spiritual bypass because you're bypassing. You're bypassing via a spiritual truth, via a universal truth. And that doesn't help your healing, that doesn't help your real world issues, that doesn't help you take responsibility, that doesn't help your personal growth. And there is a difference between trusting the process, which is hard to do, it's not easy to surrender. It's not easy to fully trust the process. Especially if these aren't truths shared in our education, where it has been a hyperfixation on like the purely physical, the purely tangible, the purely linear. And so if you've developed over years and you've come into contact with these spiritual truths, it's tempting to just like grasp them and then just like it's the color, I don't know, like gold, and just put the gold paint everywhere, which looks beautiful, but maybe you, I don't know, put gold paint all over the house bills and then your electricity gets cut off. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't know if that was a good example, but yeah, anyway. So yeah, there is a difference between trusting the process and ignoring what needs to be dealt with in the present moment. Okay. In, let's say, relationships, let's say, yeah, okay. Let's say within specific relationship, be it a partner, be it a friend or whoever. And maybe, oh my God, so many examples are coming to my brain. Just pick one, Sophie. Okay. So maybe you're super interested in someone and you've seen each other a few times and you are feeling you have a fear of rejection. Okay. And that's a particular wound which you haven't really worked on. And maybe you're only very briefly aware of it. Like, heck, maybe you haven't even identified it with those words. But that's a pattern for you. You fear rejection. So you withhold sharing yourself honestly and openly with that person. And if there's something, like there's a message that you're almost like waiting for from them, you want to see if they invite you to go to have a picnic or whatever, instead of you taking action and being like, I know what I want, I'm aware that I feel fear of rejection, and I'm not going to wait because it's not the right time, or they'll get back to me when they're ready, or they'll get back to me when the time is right, or if it's meant to be, it will be. I'll just wait here and sit passively. I'm not going to do that. I'm aware of that. And I'm going to send them a message and invite them to go for a walk with me tomorrow morning or in a week's time. Okay? And so what you've done is you've faced the heavier emotional undercurrents in some way, shape, or form. You haven't then used divine timing as a mechanism of avoidance or defense, and you've taken action. So you see how that is not bypassing through the usage of the truth of divine timing. It could be divine timing that this person is catalyzing this lesson for you, that this person who you really feel a lot of strong feelings towards has come into your life at this time because your soul knows that you need to face the fear of rejection. Okay, so the divine timing aspect is super multifaceted. It's non-linear. It could be addressing various lessons and themes for you all at the same time. So that's really beautiful. But just to really hammer in that point, because we learn via repetition and it's really important to grasp. Anything that gets used as a bypass, particularly when talking about divine timing, is when divine timing is when the knowing that there's a divine holding, that things are divinely orchestrated, that there's synchronicity, that if things are meant for you, in some way they will be for you. In knowing that you have a destiny, a soul's path, right? Grasping that in some sense, but taking that truth and then applying it over here, which is actually you denying the need to take action, denying the reality that there's some stuff that you need to face, that there's some shadow work you need to do, that there's some unresolved emotional wounds or attachment style wounding that you need to face. It's a bypass when divine timing is used to fuel passivity, when in actuality you really know that you got to be proactive, is when it feeds apathy and complacency because spirit said no, because it's not the right time, okay? Something else as a sort of like maybe a disclaimer is I'm not denying that there are some periods in your life, even astrologically, okay, in which the energy is primed in a specific way that could be harnessed by you, because it's almost like, how do I say that? The energy of that time is better suited for you to go actualize something, okay? Or the energy of that time is better suited for you to go within, do the self-reflection work, and re-emerge out of the chrysalis, okay? So there are periods of time which are, why is the word charged? It's like charged, that's what's coming, which are charged in a certain way, depending on the time of year, the astrological constellation. So yeah, that's also a thing. And I'm not denying that. It's also just recognizing that that too could be used as a bypass of like, oh, the astrology says this is my time to be super powerful and I'm supposed to just be super abundant in this time. So I'm just going to wait here and wait for that power and that abundance instead of taking that on board and being like, okay, cool. I've been putting off structuring my time. I'm going to go structure my time. I'm going to focus on some priorities, and now using this period of time, harnessing the potential of this time, I'm going to put in the effort. There's a difference. You feel that? And just another note on that, even if there is a period of time which has energy, which are like seeds of potential for a particular area of your life, like the power, like the abundance, whatever it might be. It is also a bypass if you experience a challenge or an obstacle, or things were harder than you thought, or it wasn't handed to you on a silver platter, okay? And then you back down and you go like, oh, inaction, okay? So I hope that's clear. A few more points on like kind of signs that you're using divine timing as a bypass is, yeah, everything we've said, and you being reluctant to communicate clearly, deflecting responsibility by saying it wasn't the right time without offering a further explanation, using vague language to avoid clarity or accountability in relationships, business, personal development, health, right? And that vague language vaguely like drawing from the universal truth and trying to apply that. And also you having a fear of making mistakes, disguised as trusting the universe, disguised as if it's meant to be, it will be, but I'm not going to try, kind of thing. When in actuality, it's a fear of failure, it's a fear of rejection, it's XYZ. Okay, so hopefully this is clear enough to help you sense that divine timing and these other things are real and true and whole, though there is a way to let them guide you in a way that is real and true and whole, that isn't feeding bypassing, that isn't feeding various fears, which isn't feeding self-sabotage, right? And moving on, there is something that I want to share as well about how, because we're speaking about divine timing, there is a feeling of mystery, the unknown, when we enter more of a surrender state. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the right to seek clarity. There are some periods in our time, in our life, where we won't have clarity. And that's okay. That's the point. We take it step by step. And along that path, we still may encounter something that we need to seek clarity with. So you see, on a zoomed out perspective, it's the unknown. The point is not to have super clear clarity to see step 100. Zoomed in order to progress to step 3, we might need to seek some clarity. You have the right to do that. You have the right to seek clarity in any situation, whether it's in relationships, your work, your spiritual development, your personal development, your daily life. It's important to ask for clarity when the energy shifts in a relationship or circumstances seemingly randomly, right? What happened? I feel there's something that's changed really quickly. Did I miss something? Or, hey, boss man, I feel like you're being really cold to me. Did I do something? It's important to ask for clarity when we're unsure where we stand with someone, when we are beginning something new, okay? We're facing the unknown when we're beginning something new, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't ask for clarity about something in order to help us build a solid foundation so that we can sustain that something new. It's important to ask for clarity even if we've done the thing for 10 years and then a question arises, or we've progressed in a certain way and now we've got to learn new skills within the thing that we've been doing for a while, so ask the questions. And we're allowed to ask for clarity when we feel confused or uncertain about what action to take. So divine timing should never be used as a shield to deny clarity. We are allowed to ask, to seek, to knock the door for understanding, but not to get attached to this understanding, not to have a fixated need to control everything because we only feel safe if we understand. See how I took that to the extreme and then you're like, oh yeah, that doesn't feel good? You see? So anything really taken to the extreme is when you're reaching that territory of like, oh, this has gone maybe a bit too far, or I've just swung the pendulum way the other way and I'm not taking any action now. So yeah, I hope that visual can help. And yeah, I know in some times in my life there have been things where I feel like I should already know, or I have to do it all alone, and I shouldn't ask for various perspectives from trusted friends or family members because there's some sort of shame in asking questions. So I invite you to be aware if that's a process for you, if there's this feeling like I need to do it all alone, or I'm supposed to know, right? Even though I'm facing the unknown, I'm supposed to know how to do this, right? I'm not supposed to seek guidance from teachers, practices, coaches, friends, whoever, okay? And if that is you, if you do feel this sort of shame in asking questions, or this fear of being seen as controlling or impatient or overly attached or perfectionistic, right? Maybe face the parts of you that are overly attached, that are controlling, that are perfectionistic, and then discern, do I still need to ask this question? Is that still in my highest and best good? If there's a sense that, yeah, it is, then go for it. Without pedestalling what the other says, what guidance they give, right? without taking the thing as gospel, without you giving your agency away, you see? And the shame can kind of come in sometimes if we don't understand something, because we feel like, let's say it's even with a teaching, we feel like we don't want the person to feel like we don't trust them. And it's really about maintaining an open, honest heart and engaging in reciprocal communication. Within communication and asking questions, you can also ask for feedback. Okay, maybe you're entering a period of the unknown in your life and big shifts have happened, and you're like, is there something that I'm missing here? Or there's been this series of things which have repeated. Do you see a way that I'm contributing to this without me knowing? So that you're asking for maybe some blind spots of yours, having a light shone upon them, which is super mature and super cool, okay? Because it's not always that we can point out our own blind spots, and that's where the power of relationships shines its light. Relationships that are honest and true help us to identify our blind spots, help us to integrate our shadows by having the mirror in front of us mirroring back to us our own shadows, okay? Helping us to see where we are bypassing, okay? So that's where clarity can come in, because clarity a lot of the time comes through relating, through the feedback mechanisms of communication, okay? So yeah, moving on. I want to speak a little bit about the difference between avoidance and boundaries. So avoidance is, like we've shared, like what we've spoken about quite a bit in this video, avoidance is the deflecting or delaying of responsibility, communication, action under the guise of protection, under the guise of divine timing, under the guise of boundaries. And boundaries have many faces: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual boundaries. They are clear, direct limits that protect us emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. They help us maintain our well-being. They help us understand, as I said before, our limits. They help us respect ourselves and others because it's clear, we're just communicating. And boundaries don't have to just be seen as a brick wall that's impenetrable and permanent, but boundaries can also be a door, a window, a ribbon, marking some territory for the time being. So you can see how avoidance can be confused with boundaries, like it's not the right time, or, I'm not supposed to do this thing because it's supposed to have already happened, as a sort of like marking of some territory, or no, I'm not going to reach out and communicate with them because I'm not emotionally available boundary, when in actuality it's massive fear of confrontation, it's unresolved attachment styles, whatever it might be. So it can be subtle sometimes, but also kind of obvious. So pay attention to that if you can. Avoidant behavior can really come through in the patterns of ignoring, ghosting, delaying responses, delaying responsibilities, procrastination, perfectionism is also a form of avoidance, right? And so it can also come through in various excuses that draw on the spiritual language, the spiritual principles, without solid communication or foundations backing those excuses up, right? Backing them. It could even be passive-aggressive avoidance of conflict under the name of boundaries, right? So various forms. And really how to take a step back from these avoidant patterns is practice direct and clear communication. Practice being honest, okay? Practice being honest with yourself, which isn't always easy. I know, trust me. It's not always easy to be honest with ourselves, because there's even the false self is really set on protecting you in a certain way, based on various experiences or conditionings, right? And it doesn't want you to access the truth because that would threat it, but it would also activate the pain body, which wants you to be safe in the familiar known. So I say practice being honest with yourself, and I acknowledge that that's not always easy, so do your best. And by extension, practice being honest with others. Okay, if you notice that you have some avoidant tendencies, like your attachment style is avoidant most of the time, let's say, or you feel really like there's a huge issue in your life and you just don't want to face it and you're aware of that, communicate it, okay? Share that. Like, I just feel like I really don't want to look at this. I feel like I want to keep running away. I feel so afraid. I feel XYZ. So direct and transparent communication can start small and just keep practicing. It's almost like a muscle that we need to build as well. Just like love is a muscle that we need to build sometimes. And, it's not useful to be like, oh, we just should be this. Like, says who, right? What might be a strength for you might not be a strength for someone, and what might be a strength for someone may not be an automatic strength for you, and that's okay. So you can avoid avoidant patterns by self-reflecting, okay? Keeping an open mind, asking yourself questions about why you're doing what you're doing, asking yourself, is this a boundary or am I avoiding? Ask yourself, is this really about divine timing or am I avoiding? Am I uncomfortable about facing the situation? Am I feeling really fearful? And there have been past wounds that are really flaring up right now. And the self-reflection helps you see that, and so you can cultivate a lot of compassion for yourself without bypassing, you see? So a number of ways you can disentangle from avoidant patterns, but those were just a few. Just checking my notes here to see what else I want to cover. Acknowledging that we are already at an hour, basically. Yeah. Okay. This is a key point here about how when I'm speaking about avoidance, bypassing, may I remind you that I'm not just speaking about the individual. I'm not just saying that that's your issue. A lot of the time, these are collective, cultural, systemic patterns that we inherit through being born in this time, in that family, and so on. When avoidance becomes normalized collectively, we can see entire communities fall into cycles of non-action, of censorship, of silencing, of passive disengagement, passive control, right? And this disconnects people. This fragments communities. This leads to weakened relationships, and on an individual level, it creates disempowered individuals. And then you're fed this story that it's all on you, that this is your issue. And on some level, yeah, right? It's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. That's true. It's the victim bypass if we can see it on a collective level and be like, well, it's just the way it is. You see how that's a bypass? So know that it's not a purely hyper-individualistic issue. The whole notion of spiritual bypassing, of bypassing full stop, of avoidance. But just pay attention to, if you can notice it on the global stage, then ask yourself, where am I doing this in my life? And if you notice it in your life, likely you'll notice it outside too. So don't get lost in that, okay? So that you lose touch with your process and what is real and present for you, which you're being invited to take self-responsibility for. But my invitation with this is for you to not get so like, oh my God, this is only my problem and it's all for me to fix kind of thing. It's just take responsibility for you. By extension, you'll become a potentiator to assist others in your network to do the same. And there will be benevolent ripples of change which can come from that. And that's really beautiful and really empowering. So, yeah, just a note on that. I've hammered in the point that divine timing as a bypass can be used to be in passivity, apathy, and inaction. To reframe that, divine timing doesn't mean don't do the thing, or there's a challenge so it's not for me. It's encouraging aligned action. It encourages us to act with mindfulness, not avoidance, or not impulsivity or reactivity. It invites us to take responsibility for what we can control, while trusting that what's outside of your control it's okay. There's, from a higher vantage point, it's perfect. Even if I don't like it, even if on some level that seems crazy to say that that's perfect. Like, what do you mean huge fires are perfect? You're tripping. What do you mean war is perfect? You're tripping. And sure, like on a zoomed in perspective, not cool, not fun, not nice, seemingly not perfect. But from a higher vantage point, it is, because it's happening, because it's reality. And that's not to be used as a bypass of like, oh, everything's failing in my life because it's supposed to be, because that's reality. Like, no, like, yes. And on a zoomed in level, what are you not wanting to look at? What fears are showing up, which you find hard to look at? What is this lesson for you? What is the meta lesson, right, at this time in your life? Okay, so I feel amused at how whenever there's truth to be shared, information to be shared, it's not whole and complete without the nuances being spoken to. Like, there's the zooming out, there's the zooming in, there's the two sides of the coin, there's the white in the black and the black in the white. So I hope you can bear with the nuance there. And I hope that that does make sense. And yeah, to not bypass, we should face our shadows. And those shadows might be the victim. It might be conflict avoidance. It might be a fear of failure, the perfectionist, whatever it might be. Because when we do that, they don't have power over us. And so if a challenge does arise, where previously we would have been like, it's not meant to be because huge obstacle has come in my way, doing the shadow work allows us to see that and be like, oh, okay, I can see that there's a big obstacle that's just crossed my path. That sucks. I'm going to be able to deal with it in some way. I have resources, people I can draw upon. And I realize that this has come here to actually help me cultivate steadfastness and resilience, which is what I need for my self-actualization of this goal or of this particular path that I'm walking. That's the power of shadow work, so that we don't become a slave to the shadows, which love the bypassing in ways. Not all of them, but some of them do. Okay. And so we can grow, so that we can recognize that we have patterns of self-sabotage and not allow them to control us, not allow them to diminish our capacity to communicate, to act, to face life head on, to know when we do need some yin rejuvenation, peaceful times, and when we do need that yang directed active times, okay? So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Super, yeah, I just notice all these like threads of nuance, so trying to keep it concise here. A final recap of the key point here is that divine timing is real, but it shouldn't be used as a way to avoid responsibility, to avoid taking action, to avoid facing an obstacle and learning how to move through it. We have the right to seek clarity, to communicate, to act. We have the right to know our limits and set boundaries, to face the shadows so we know that we're not actually just avoiding. And we have the right to seek guidance, right? From people who have been walking this path for longer than us, who may be able to share some really valuable insights, so we're not thinking we have to just reinvent the wheel. And, if we've lacked certain skills in our life and these people who can come into our life can be a healthy role model, that's awesome, okay? We also have the right not to pedestal them, okay? So wrapping up this video, I invite you to reflect upon various areas of your life which you might have been bypassing in, be it your health, your work, your friendships, your relationship, whatever it might be. Ask yourself if you have been finding solace in truths like divine timing or various other principles, knowing that they have truth, but also knowing that you haven't really been fully believing yourself because you know that you've been avoiding some things. Just notice that. No shaming, no judgment, right? Because, we want to remain equanimous so that we don't get wrapped up in a shadow party, okay? But that's the invitation, like with all the videos. Now that you heard this, notice. Is that something which has been playing out for you? Is that something which you've noticed people around you have been getting wrapped up in? And from there, you might gain some insight. You might get a sense that, you want to do some journaling about this. You want to do some more research about this. You want to talk to people about this. So trust that the next step will reveal itself as you walk on the path. It always does, even if it's in a way we didn't expect. And in some sense, that's divine timing. Thank you for being here with me. I wish you well on your path as always, and stick around on this channel anytime. We got some good stuff here, more good stuff coming. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, hit the notification bell. Support this channel by liking this video, commenting below, and sharing this with someone who might find this really supportive. So until the next time, see you.